Hi, I'm Deb Crow, and I want to welcome you to Season 3 of Imperfect, the Heart-Centered Leadership Podcast. This is a podcast where we connect, learn, and laugh together with authentic and courageous leaders from all over the globe. You will learn from leaders you haven't even met yet. You will gain new tools to add to your leadership toolkit. Leadership belongs to all of us. It's not measured by stature or title. So please pull up a chair and listen in. This is the Heart-Centered Leadership Podcast. You've heard me say so many times on this show, and here we are in Season 3, I continue to meet the most amazing people around the globe from every sector, which is why I feel we are this borderless society now. We know what sector we work in, but with technology and the ability to be heart-centered and align with people and have meaningful conversations, it seems like a limitless highway to me, and it's one that I'm so happy to be on. I have another amazing heart-centered leader to introduce you today. I have Dr. Toby Travis on the show, and I want to tell you a little bit about him before we have an amazing interview. Dr. Toby Travis and the TrustED framework for developing trusted leadership is really what his mission and fulfillment of life is about. He considers it to be a well-being of businesses. I love that phrase, and I can't wait to talk to him about that. He has been featured in Forbes, CEO World Magazine, Authority Magazine, The Knowledge Review, and many more. He has an interesting story that we're going to dive into, and he has decades of experience for doing research. He's a trusted leader, and there's so many things I could tell you about him, but I'd rather have an engaging conversation. So Dr. Toby, welcome to the show.
Hello, Deb. Thank you for having me.
I always love reading bios, but I'd rather bring that bio to life and have a great conversation, and excited to talk to you today. And I want to thank you for your time and becoming a guest on the show. And I really want to dig in today to the work that you're doing and the model that you've created. So if you're ready, I've got some leadership questions coming your way.
I'm ready. Bring it on.
One of the proposed topics that you had really passionately wanted to talk about was trust. And we all know that it's the foundation and the cousin to rapport in any relationship. So my first question is, how have you seen trust between leaders and employees, or even the community at large? You've witnessed it being broken, but you've also been on the upscale, if you will, for helping that get repaired. Can you share a little bit of a scenario or a story or a strategy, and just bring us into your world in that regard?
Well, most of my work, Deb, has been in the education sector for quite a long time now. And I remember back my first teaching classroom experience, and I think I was a bit naive coming into that setting. I just assume, hey, we're all here for the kids, right? We're all here for the learning. And unfortunately, what I came into was really what we would describe today as a toxic work environment, and really hostility between the administration and the faculty and staff. And then what happened over a very short amount of time, in the course of, I was at that school for 7 years. I ended up being in leadership and even senior leadership before I left. So I went from, in the classroom to managing the classrooms, and really had an opportunity then. And I'm so blessed to have worked with some amazing and wonderful people who are willing to be transparent, who are willing to talk about the elephant in the room, and then to try to figure out some strategies and steps forward to intentionally change that culture. And first of all, it began with, I think, intentionally trying to understand what was going on. And for me, as somebody new, when I first came out, I had no clue what is everybody so upset about, And so I had to kind of dig into culture and earlier blunders by leadership, and then own it. And then, often as leaders, Deb, we inherit problems that we did not create, but we still have to solve them. And so that takes, you were asking, strategies, I guess. To me, one of the biggest or one of the most important strategies and skill sets of heart-centered leaders, listening, just to be able to actually listen and really listen. And that involves asking lots of questions without trying to get to a solution. It means take the time to hear people well. And so that was kind of a starting place. And I'm very happy to say that by the time my journey was done with that school, we did see a wonderful turnaround, and we saw some very, very healthy and important improvements to the school culture and the residual benefits. One of the things that I love to talk about as well, Deb, is when you get this right, all kinds of good things start happening. And I've seen that in the education sector. I've seen it in the business sector. I've seen it in the nonprofit world. When there are trusted leaders and trusted relationships between coworkers, all kinds of wonderful things start happening that you really didn't intentionally go after, but you start seeing innovation. You start seeing just a higher level of engagement of everyone, and the production level, if you will, just goes up. But you've got to get that right first. So that was kind of my introduction to being passionate about this. And concurrently, back in those years, it was also when I started to do my serious studies on trust, and thus that was the focus of my doctoral program.
There's so many beautiful nuggets to unpack there. I love that you said that we have to talk about the elephant in the room. If we go with the old cliche, you can't deflate the elephant until you talk about it. I love that. And also taking ownership for what is truly going on from a behavioral perspective. You can't fix a culture until someone is able to really analyze it, observe, listen. But there needs to be some ownership. And the other big point I want to talk about is inheriting problems. Every leader takes over from their predecessor. And like you said, Rome, I love the cliche, Rome wasn't built in a day. One leader that I had on the show said Rome was built day by day. So sometimes it's those small tweaks in languaging that really help move forward. And the listening, you're right. It's that attentive listening, not to consider an outcome, have an outcome, but just to be fully present. And it's difficult for people to sit in the observer's chair because as human beings, we just want to help and we want to fix, but the intent is to not be solution-based. So I really love the way you frame that. Now, my second question has permanent residency. I'm never going to take it off the show because I think it's such an individual connection for each of the guests that I've had. Share with us what imperfections that you bring to your heart-centered leadership.
This wasn't always true, but I became a data geek. Maybe that was, as I pursued advanced degrees and saw just the importance of it. Certainly in my young adult life, that it wasn't something I was obsessed with. And I'm not defending it yet. I'll get to defending it, Deb, in a moment. But I think my imperfection is also, sometimes our weaknesses is our strength, right? So in my team, they'll tell he's always asking, what's the data say? What's the data say? Well, because to me, when we're looking at organizational improvement, school improvement, Stephen Covey, it's all about speed, right? He talks about the speed of trust. And the reason that's so important is when we know the trust levels are high, everything gets faster and better. And this is what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to solve problems. So I do tend to be again, a bit of a data geek. And I know not everyone can relate to that, but I also, there is there's the negative vibe that's out there. People say, well, data can tell you anything. Well, not really. That's kind of a myth that's out there. We're going, you can manipulate the data to save everyone. Well, no, not really. Not if you really know how to truly look at data and use data. Now, can that happen incorrectly? Yeah. Perhaps it can manipulate, but if we know what data to look for. So again, I'm defending myself already, but I guess my imperfection tied to that, though, then, and here's where maybe it gets a little bit more self-revealing, is I'll get absorbed in the reading. I'll get absorbed in, well, who else looked at this? What else is out there? Because what you learn is there's always more than two sides to a story. There's 15 or more. And when you're trying to make good decisions, what I've learned is you want to make those decisions slowly, and you want to get as much information as you can. So here I'm going to get to the imperfection, Deb. I have to train myself, and I have to empower my assistant to kick me out of my office, right? Good leaders are visible, and I know this. And actually, the data shows you this, right? And even though I know that, I get so engrossed in reading and learning and engaging with the material, I'm not as intentional as I should be in just get out and get in the hallways and get in the classrooms in my case, or and so I literally have on my calendar, I have my assistant schedule my rounds. I'm a doctor of a school rather than a medical doctor, but I'm doing my rounds. And that is so needed. And part of why I don't naturally do that is because I just get lost in just constantly reading and looking at the data and just, what's going on in the world. So there's a couple of my imperfections. One I'll defend, the other I won't, because I know, leaders have got to be visible. And a lot of leadership happens when you're just available. With no agenda, you're just moving from point A to point B, but you're taking time to be seen and taking time to see individuals. And Deb, if I may do this, probably one of the best words of counsel that was given to me was by an older gentleman who had come back, actually was speaking at a school reunion. School was celebrating its 85th anniversary. He was a legend. I was actually in his former seat as far as my position at the school. And I asked him for counsel. We were out to dinner. I said, what advice can you give me? And he said, get into every classroom every week. No agenda, just be visible. And he's right. But it goes against my natural skill set. And so it's one of those imperfections that I'm continually working on. I get support networks around me to ensure that I do it because it does pay off. And I've seen it pay off almost every time I step outside this office.
I love that. And my definition of heart-centered leadership is honoring your connection with people. So, when someone in a leadership position drops in a classroom, the first kind of everybody looking around, why is he here? And you're just there to embrace the now and be present with no agenda. And that's when people open up and share, and you get your greatest data because you're there with no reasoning. I love what you said about 15 sides of a story. I grew up with an Irish Nana, and she used to say, there's 3 sides to a story. There's your side, their side, and what really happened. And I was like 10 or 11 years old, pre-adolescent. But it was something that really stuck to me. And the older I got and the more wisdom and maturity I had, boy, did it ever make sense. So it's interesting. So with time, it's 5 timed itself now. As you said, there's 15, and that could be a whole podcast right there. Okay, my third question is, you talk about the number one indicator of a successful school or business is trusted leadership. And I love that you also love the quote by Abraham Lincoln, the people when rightly and fully trusted will return to the trust. You alluded to Stephen Covey's work. I know you also like Jim Collins's quote, level 5 leaders understand the importance of putting people first and strategy second. You've alluded a little bit to this in what we've talked to so far. What has been your best observation of indicators in the role that you're in now? And what's kind of a proud moment that you've recently had during the pandemic?
Well, again, I'll go back to the listening, taking time to hear and be empathetic. Whenever we can be, that empathy is such a huge skill, and it really delivers so much in return. And empathy doesn't mean that you have to necessarily agree with everybody. It just means you understand the other individual is going through some struggle, maybe some hurt, maybe some trauma. Frequently, I've sat here in this office with a disgruntled parent or an angry staff member, and I can honestly say, oh, this has got to be hard for you. Now, it doesn't mean I'm agreeing with their position, but I can empathize that, man, this really stinks, doesn't it? And just that element of empathy. And so I have seen that in leaders that I work with, and I appreciate that, and getting through managing a school during COVID. Oh my goodness, nobody had that in our Superintendent 101 class, right? And so being able to work with a team that was very careful to listen to voices, to monitor them. We were constantly tweaking our health and safety plan in a good way. And so it was, okay, we kept learning new things. We were responsive to that, trying to be responsive to all stakeholders. Obviously, safety of kids and staff of the utmost, but also, listening to parents. And of course, as you know, there was such division. It's like, oh, wow, could there be any more divisive opportunity? Yes, there probably can be. But watching leaders who, no, let's listen to these voices. And even though we may not agree with their perspective, it's a perspective and they're part of our stakeholders. They're part of our community, and that needs to have value. So I think the indicator would be listening and having opportunity for others to have a voice in decisions that are being made. That would be another indicator that we weren't just being autocratic. We weren't just saying, well, except what we were mandated, right? It was, well, the governor told us, so here we go. That we didn't have much say in. But what we could manage ourselves, that sensitivity to the whole community, really, really important.
Well, and it's interesting because you have so much going on in the U.S. with your school. So part of your plan to foster that is always health and safety. And it's to the sadness of watching the news, which I don't want to talk about, but having that radical empathy and being able to sit in the observer's chair. And it doesn't mean you're taking sides or agreeing, but you can sit in that observer's chair and really understand their vantage point, where the feelings, emotions, and thoughts are coming from, which dictates that behavior. And it's so important. So the indicators of what you talked about mainly was fostering that listening, that empathy, that attentiveness as a leader, because you can go in with a scheduled X amount of tasks for the day, but you've got your support team in place that say it's time for you to do your rounds. And I love that you frame that, because you don't have to be a medical doctor. You still need to do your rounds as a superintendent in a school. And really, it's the same skill set, isn't it?
Yeah. When I'm assisting others and trying to be reflective, the indicator and that I talk about in the book a lot is where we see trust breaking down is when we state certain beliefs and values, but then we don't support and connect what we're doing in our practice to who and what we say we are as an individual or as an organization. So that would be another real indicator, is consistency of practice and protocols and even policies that are in alignment with who we say we are and what we value.
Absolutely. And the tail end of my other question, I know you're going to answer in my last question, and that's what I want to talk about. First, I want to congratulate you on your award-winning book, TrustED, which I love, and the ED is capitalized, The Bridge to School Improvement. We will put the details below in our podcast episode description so our listenership can see that it's available at Amazon. You've been featured in Forbes and also been named Book of the Month in November and donated for Book of the Year for 2021 by the Magic Pen. So super exciting to share in the accolades and awards from this book. I think you've given us a nice glimpse into where your passion came from this book, but when did you know it was time to release and publish this book? Because I'm sure you had been working on it for a while.
It was a long journey. Again, came out of a doctoral program. and really I love to give credit to my wife constantly for this, because, you come through a program and you learn so much. And I had developed some training sessions that I was using material out of my program and out of the study. And that was going well. I'm getting invitations to speak and train here and there and everywhere. But I knew, no, I've got to get this into something people can use. But you need a framework. You need, felt like I needed a visual. We're visual learners. And I'm like, how do I talk about this in a way? There's so many complexities that are interconnected. My wife's sitting at the table. She goes, well, sweetie, isn't it just like a bridge? And Deb, the lights went off in my head. I'm like, that's it. That's a great concept. I actually spent about the next 3 months reading everything I could on bridges. Again, here goes the data guy, right? So I learned all about bridge architecture and construction and learned how complex it was. And what I identified were these 6 components that we find in a suspension bridge are great analogies of the 6 components of trusted leadership. So that's kind of where the passion and the idea came up. I had a major publisher that approached me. I was actually doing a training for school consultants, and the publisher was there. We engaged a conversation, worked together actually for a few years, when they actually, during the pandemic, took a shift and ended up not publishing the book. First, I thought it was a negative thing because we'd been working on it for literally years. And they gave it all back to me, even with all the work of their editors, because just their catalog, they decided not to include this in their catalog. And it wasn't negative about the book. They literally blessed me with everything. So was able to release it through Amazon or KDP. And honestly, and it's not false humility, had no clue I would end up in Forbes and winning awards. That was never the intent. The intent was with the schools that I have helped, those that I would like to help in the future, and even those that I won't personally be able to help. Like, no, this has changed how I have led schools. I've seen using this framework turn schools and organizations around, and literally just wanted the resource out there. Because if leaders miss this, Deb, it's why 70% of improvement initiatives don't work. And that's a stat that we talk about all the time. But 70% of new business launches, 70% of the school initiatives, 70% of business improvement initiatives fail. Why do they fail? It all comes back to leadership. And you've got to get this trust element right. And if you skip over that, you're just setting yourself up for failure. So it is the issue. And like you quoted from the research, it is the number one indicator of success. And what's really fascinating about that, it doesn't seem to matter how we measure or define success. In the school world, if we're talking about student achievement levels, teacher retention rates, community support and involvement, in the private school sector, the financial bottom line, every one of those benefits or indicators are directly connected to the level of trust in the school's leadership. And the same holds true in the business and manufacturing sector and in the nonprofit world.
Well, it goes back to what I said at the beginning of the podcast. We all have our sector, but we're borderless. And it doesn't matter what sector we're in, we're all in the people business.
Yes, right.
And if we don't have trust and rapport, you can have the best of the best, and it's not going to work. It's not going to move ahead. And I think it's so important. I'm so excited now to go get your book. I need to read this book. And good for your wife. The best things come out of a kitchen table conversation.
Absolutely.
All right. I'm going to switch to my Fab Four fun questions. This is where you have to tell the data guy to take a break, because we just want whatever's sitting on the top of your brilliant mind. First question, tell us something that we don't know about you.
Well, for many years, I was in show business. So as a young man, actually as a teenager, I was mentored by an old vaudeville performer who had retired and became like another grandpa to me. And so by the time I was 14, 15, I was doing school assemblies and blue and gold dinners and Rotary Club dinners. And I was performing as a magician. I grew up in a musical family, and so was an aspiring singer. You can still find it on eBay. There was an album that was released in 1985. I have a brother that's a songwriter, and he and I collaborated. So I entertainment background. So aspiring actor, magician, illusionist, singer. I produced a touring variety show for a number of years before segueing into professional education. Education was always in the background. It was always a passion, but it was always kind of, well, if I wasn't on the road touring, I'd teach. And I did about 20 years on the road and had enough. I'd lived the dream, and it was time, to do something different. But there you go.
I love that.
And a lot of and I've talked about this with other interviews, that a lot of transferable skills, though, from managing a production company and a road show to leading schools. Actually, there's been a lot of transferable skills, and so unlikely path to school administration, but yeah, there you go.
I love that, and I love that you highlighted transferable skills. If we go back to the first job we had as a young person, and wrote down every job we've had since to present moment, there's a lot of transferable skills in there. And people forget that. So I'm glad that you pointed that out. And I love that you had this balanced career. You were doing your due diligence for longevity in the background, but living in the moment also at the same time. That's work-life integration right there. I love it. Okay, second question. Favorite book that you've ever read that you found was really impactful for your life? And if you can remember the title and the author, we'd love for you to share.
Well, not to sound overly spiritual, but certainly the Bible, my goodness. And I think of Christian authors like George MacDonald, who was actually the inspiration for C.S. Lewis. I think Mere Christianity was just wow, and you have to read it understanding the context of the time in which he wrote it as well. I know there's been criticism of his work as well, but of course everyone knows him for Chronicles of Narnia, and those are lovely books and stories. So that, as far as personal growth and impact, even Lewis's space trilogy, wonderful fiction, but there is so many lessons about humanity and life, and just a brilliant man and brilliant writer, and MacDonald before him. And there have been some updates to the MacDonald novels. They've been rewritten in more contemporary English. They're a little bit easier to get through than if you read the originals. But those, as far as, just enjoyment and sit back and cozy up by the fire with a good old book. Those come to mind right away.
I love that. That's not the first time it's been mentioned, several times on the podcast. You're in good company. Okay, third question. I am going to grant you a wish, and you get to have dinner with a leader. So to provide some context, the leader can be living or they could have passed away. Who are you having dinner with? And what is the conversation at dinner?
Just one.
Just one.
Well, I think today, because I've been such a fan of his work and have used so much of his work, I would love to interact with Jim Collins and his Good to Great work. To me, just absolutely brilliant. And I have seen, that problem, how good is the enemy of great. I've seen it in the schools and the organizations that I've been a part of and those that I'm trying to help, is often we are our own worst enemies to actually reach our mission fulfillment, because there's so much mission drift, as it's been called, that goes on. We get involved. I do a lot with the Christian school world, and I love Christian education. Unfortunately, a lot of Christian education, and I want to be careful that I'm not but there are many schools that do not reach the level of excellence that they could because they're so busy doing so many good things. They're trying to meet the needs in their community, which is great, and they're trying to meet the needs of their families and their students. But as Dr. Bruce Lockerbie once said, a school is a school, and you got to keep that in mind. So what I love about Collins is just this idea of understanding that great schools, great organizations, great ministries, great, pick your sector again, we're back, it's universal. They know where they're going and they stay focused, and they know what to say no to in order to stay focused. There are so many needs in the world, and I get it. That's hard work. But this is why it is very, very important for organizations, and I would say even individuals, to know what is your mission, what are you committed and called to, and what are your values that surround that mission about how you're going to do this, and what does that look like, and then process everything you're doing through that mission and vision and those values.
It's a good quotient to have, and it's easy to talk about and harder to implement and sustain. And I think you're doing it very well. So before we close out the show with my last question, I'm going to have you finish a sentence. But I just want to say that super grateful that our paths have crossed. And thank you for taking the time to share not only your experience and your expertise, but giving us a little glimpse into the heart-centered leadership work that you're doing.
Thank you.
And I'm going to close out the show by asking you, question number 4 is to finish this sentence in your own words, whatever pops into your mind first and foremost. Heart-centered leadership is?
It's all about trust.
Thanks for joining me today on Imperfect, the Heart-Centered Leadership Podcast. I hope that you've enjoyed the show today and learned some new tools for your leadership from our amazing heart-centered guest. And if you like the show, we would welcome a rating and review on whatever platform you listen to. And we would love to have any comments or feedback at any time. And if you want some more heart-centered goodness, head over to our daily blog, masteringtheheart.com.